Do we understand how Singapore became Singapore? That's the first thing. Ũngiuga he ndũrenda gũthiĩ no nginya ũmenye nguma harĩa ndĩ thaa ici rĩ gũkinya harĩa ndĩrathiĩ rĩ, how do I get there? What is the journey? What does it cost? Right? What do I need to do nĩgetha nginye kũrĩa ndĩrathiĩ? The truth is ũngĩrora bũrũri ta Singapore, ũthome history of Singapore. Singapore did certain things. First, one of the things that it did was very serious about corruption. Corruption kills dreams. It takes away money from the government's ability to go into the infrastructure. Our country loses about 800 billion every year to corruption. A budget in normally 4 trillion. So when you're losing almost a third, your budget yaku, there's no way you can be Singapore. Todo every shilling counts, right? Look at what we are doing for you, people generally get promoted to government. They have been, accused of public corruption, significant public corruption. So just on that alone, it's a very dubious claim at Singapore. Look at something else. Singapore engage in long-term planning. But there's an infrastructure project or this and that. They engage in long-term planning. Every single shilling is taking us to that destination. What we've been doing in this country, Goreto in the last 2 months, study where does the money go at the national government? The first department, I will tell you right now, to enable hundreds of billions to invest some type of project. As soon as we get started, we stop. Oftentimes we are giving this money to people who have never done this before. We give someone a contract for 20 billion. 2-3 years, may abandon. So we have hundreds of billions. My study shows more than 700 billions in abandoned projects. So go back and look at what Singapore did. Singapore treated every single, whatever the currency is, very seriously. But so every single, let me call it shilling, counts, right? So when you look at us, we don't do that. Over 700 billion worth of abandoned projects. Singapore didn't do that. Look at other things. Singapore identified what is it that Singapore can do for the world. Makamenya, they don't have a lot of people, population there. Makamenya, they don't have any natural resources, they don't have diamond, but they have gold, right? Maka identify what is it that we can do. And what Singapore decided was, if we do smart people, we can invest in human capital, the skills. That's what we can offer to the world. Look at Singapore, even though it's a very small population, 6 million, its economy is about 4 times Kenya's economy. For 6 million people versus over 50 million people. But the GDP of Singapore is 4 times higher than Kenya's economy. So, Singapore, they are highly skilled. So, I think they have maybe the number 1 or number 2 per capita income. Per capita, if you divide that by the population, you get what's called per capita income. It's very high.
All right.
The economy, relative to the population, Singapore punches above its weight.
All right.
Yeah.
Ndenda twambe tugayukanie maundu macio meri.
Okay.
Twambe turore infrastructure fund.
Yes.
Na element iria ciothe cimithiururukirie.
Yes.
Na maundu maria meyumiria hari miario ya bunge cio tucoke riu turore thabari ino ya guthie Singapore uria ihana. Leke twambiririe na uhoro uyu wa miario ino yario ni atongoria aya. Kimani wa Icũng'wa arauga thirikari ikoretwo gikomba niguo meet the recurrent expenditure.
Yeah.
Recurrent expenditure in this case
yes.
ni kuriha mishara na maundu maria mecokagira oro mweri.
Yeah.
Nake Ndindi Nyoro akauga atiriri mbeca ciothe iria cira kombori cibatie gukorwo cia development.
Yeah.
I will want to hear your views, but again uhoro wigi mainie na guthondeka kwa infrastructure fund eta a limited liability company hihi no ambe ututhathaurire hau uguo.
Yeah. Like, how do I put this without but it's offensive when you think about this. What's happening is this: limited liability company is an investment company. You and I can we are going to develop real estate, right? To real estate developer. So we open a company, we take in investors to an investor, then we go do whatever we want to do, buy land, develop. That's what they're suggesting. The issue is, no, what's behind this real estate company? Who are the people behind it? What do they do? How do they conduct themselves? Our country today is so much in debt that we are spending 75%. Yeah, every single shilling to have the record for you, we are spending on debt. Just imagine that in your personal life. If you but you have to spend 75,000 every month for your debt service. You have no flexibility to do anything. You don't have the flexibility. That's where we are as a country. So that's where we are as a country. What do we do to get out of it? The first thing they could realize, how did you get to this point where for over a long period of time? The flexibility in geopolitical. We can't do anything. A few years ago we had COVID, right? We have no flexibility to do it. So the point is, through, the idea of investing in a limited liability company now, the country has no money to do anything. It's dubious. The first thing we need to do as a country in the Corona, how did we get to this mess? We reduce our costs as a country to Corona savings. When we have savings, that's how you start paying down some of this debt. So in my view, the idea the infrastructure fund, when we have not actually taken care of business. Taking care of business means we are spending so much money in this country on debt. How about we look for efficiency to get it out of our economy? Where does the money actually go? Let's find that. Let's deal with incompetence. Let's deal with corruption. Let's deal with wastage. To corner savings. When we have savings, then we can start paying down our debt. And then from savings, when we have the fiscal space to do it, then we can start say, okay, now we are better. The auto made 75%, maybe now it's 40%. Where can you invest? That's how you do it. Not to go to it's not. We can't just start project, although it sounds good, right?
All right.
Yeah.
Asante reke tobe tumenyithie murori wa Kameme TV uhoro wigie mucere wa Jamii Pishori Rice na mucere uyu niguo mucere uria riu wihotanire mucere mwega wina mutarariko wina cama muingi mucere utanyitanaga warugo mucere utangiguconora iruga-ini ororia muthemba wothe mucere ungirugwo na irio cia muthemba wothe iria cingihota kuruganirio na mucere na ciume cire irio njega irio citangiguconora. Uyu ni mucere ukuritio na ugekirwo bagiti-ini ni murimu kuma kuria mwena wa Mwea na uguo ni mucere wa gikiro kia iguru na riu niguo ukenerera mucere mabura-ini maya ma thiguku Jamii Pishori Rice ne makureheire offer njega ya guguteithia mwirori wa Kameme TV ati wona waingira thiini wa supermarket yoro yothe ya Naivas kilo imwe urenderio ciringi 250 handu ha ciringi 300 kilo igiri ukenderio 490 handu ha ciringi 590 naguo muhuko wa kilo 5 ukenderio ciringi 999 handu ha 1500 noguo ugaikorwo ni urakihonokia oro wa gatui. Na ungenda gutwika stockist kana gwetie mucere waku wa kuhuthira mucii no arie na mundu gwitwo Alex wa Jamii Pishori Rice uyu ungimunyitana na Beno 0700 081 115 0700 081 115 neo na mbere ya unginyita Alex wa Jamii Pishori Rice na guteithiriria gutwika stockist kana ona gwetie mucere waku uria ungikienda kuhuthira no ona tutari turathie kuria thiini wa Naivas ni turenda tugagutuga oro gabere mwirori wa Kameme TV na turorania kiuria niguo wagicokia no kaheana njira yagiriire ukaheana ritwa riaku no kaheana kuria uri tugakorwo ati ni tugugutuga kiuria gitu rucine roro rwa umuthi kihana u rekia slogan ino ya mucere wa jamii where dash begins. Rekia slogan ino ya mucere wa Jamii Pishori Rice na slogan yenyewe ni where dash begins. Wona wekira aja yaku hau uguo aja yaku umitume hamwe na ritwa riaku no coke umitume na kuria uri nĩ tũgũkorwo tũkĩaranĩria na mũhotani tũgĩthiĩ ũguo kũrĩkĩrĩria tabarĩra ĩno ithaa-inĩ rĩa thaa ithatũ cirorete na ndagĩka 50 hau ũguo nĩ tũkwaria na ũmwe wa hotani nĩguo tũgĩkorwo nĩ twamũtuga kaũndũ kega mahinda-inĩ maya ma thigũkũ. Koguo no wega ũgĩkorwo atĩ nĩwe ũgĩkorwo ũrĩ mũhotani mũrori wa Kameme TV na nĩ njũĩ nĩ ũgũkorwo ũkĩamũkĩra kĩheo. Reke tũthiĩ na mbere na ndereti gũkũ thĩinĩ wa studio tũrorania wagĩrĩru wa kĩgĩna gĩkĩ kĩrathondekirwo nĩ ndundu ya minister kĩretwo Infrastructure Fund, na no gĩkĩrehete ũrugarĩ gatagatĩ ka ataramu a maũndũ ma kĩwonjoria kana arĩa maroraga wonjoria wa gĩbũrũri na ũtonga wa bũrũri. President arauga ĩyo nĩyo njĩra ĩrĩa hũthũ mũno ya gũkinya bũrũri-inĩ wa Singapore gũthondeka kĩgĩna gĩgũkorwo na mũigana wa ciringi tririoni 5 iria cikũhũthĩka maũndũ-inĩ ta manoguo marĩa akoretwo agĩtarĩria. Ona gũtuĩka president nĩ araiguĩkana ta araikara agĩcenjagia goalpost, rĩmwe akauga nĩ maũndũ matatũ, rĩmwe akauga nĩ maũndũ mana. Nĩ tũgũkorwo tũkĩorania na mũtaramu bwana Boni Mwangi ũrĩa ũrĩ gũkũ thĩinĩ wa studio. Nĩ mũtaramu wa maũndũ ma ũtonga wa bũrũri na nĩ wagwetwo tũmaũndũ tũigana na bwana Mwangi na he kaũndũ gekũgwetetwo kĩgĩmainie na ũhoro wĩgĩmainie na mathirĩ. What do you take of the two positions iria ciroywo nĩ ambunge acio erĩ arĩa o toguo tũkugĩte mena ũhĩgĩrĩru wa maũndũ ma gũtwarithia na mbere maũndũ ma kĩmbeca ma ũtonga wa bũrũri?
Ũngĩrora statements icio twathikĩrĩria rĩ, you see one person uramenya atĩ you have to deal with the reality of where you are. Na nĩguo ndĩnyere kuga how can you be Singapore angĩkorwo you don't do basic things. Basic things nĩ kuga atĩ one of the rights in our constitution nĩ kũhe Kenyans education, right? We say it's a right. Thirikari in the last 2 months iranyihirie capitation ya secondary school from 22,000 to 12,000. In the last 3 years under this president, our national debt, thirĩ witũ as a country, ũhaicĩte kuma 8.6 trillion to 12 trillion. Ũguo nĩ kuga within 3 years, our national debt ĩhaicĩte kuma 8.6 trillion to 12 trillion, which is 40%. Na maranyihia in the last 2 or 3 months, capitation ya secondary school kuma 22,000 to 12,000. So, thirĩ wa bũrũri ũkahaica 40% in 3 years, capitation ĩgaikũrũka 45%. It doesn't make sense. Angĩkorwo, if we are trying to be Singapore, right? Angĩkorwo nĩũramenya how did Singapore became Singapore? Singapore became Singapore ũgũkwĩraga by investing in Singaporeans. That means that ciana ciendaga gũthiĩ cukuru cigakorwo na the ability to do that. Andũ magakorwo merĩ ogĩ ũka-invest so that when companies are thinking about tũgũthiĩ expand, the first place that they think about is Singapore, tondũ kwĩna andũ athomu, kwĩna andũ mena skills. So how can it be that our debt yahaica 40%, capitation ya secondary school yaikũrũka 45%, arabu turaiga atĩ we are trying to be Singapore? It doesn't make sense. It does not make sense. Ũngĩrora mũndũ ta Kimani Ichung'wah rĩ, he's selling an idea, he's selling hope, but we are not able to deal with the current reality. The first thing you need to do is invest in people. If you're interested in becoming Singapore, kĩndũ kĩa mbere gwĩka nĩ invest in Kenya, so that when people are thinking about that, I want to go to Africa, where do I go? Mageciria Kenya. So our country nĩ bũrũri mũnini, we have 50 million Kenyans. The average age for you is 20 years of age, but we are not investing in people like that. There's a gentleman who is from my county, Owen. Owen, 20 years old, right? Ararĩkirie cukuru the year before last. Grew up in very difficult circumstances. Areretwo nĩ guka wao na mamu wao in very difficult circumstances, tondũ comes from a very poor family. Gũthiĩ kũrĩhĩrwo high school, ararĩhĩrwo nĩ friends yake, sometimes by the head teacher. That kid who's 20 arakorwo admitted Egerton University, okay? But he stayed home for 1.5 months this year, kuma August nginya September, tondũ athiĩte from one government office to the next one, kũria apply scholarships, kũrora CDF bursaries, akaga. So he called me the America, akĩnjĩra ndĩmũteithie kũrĩha cukuru, and I was able to do that. That kid needed 100,000 nĩgetha dream yake ya gĩthomo ĩtuĩke realized. 100,000. So ndakwĩra he spent 1 year kuma last year nginya this year August akathi akapply CDF, akapply bursaries, akapply scholarships. For you to come we have nothing for you. He's not a priority. So think about that. I korwo the future of this country ni Owen. The kid who's 20 years old, todo 10 years from now, mudosi we 20 ni wetura expect akore taxpayer. Negetha okorete kwa ka infrastructure turaiga, okorete kwa ka thibitari. That is the person we expect to pay tax 10 years from now. Na turamwira ati tutire na pesa kumurihira sukuru, and he only needs 100,000. So what kind of a country is unable to help Owen, who needs 100,000 go to sukuru, so we are trying to be Singapore in a couple of years? It doesn't make sense. Anybody knows. I can't it's kind of like your own personal life. You cannot invest. You cannot invest. The first thing you need to do is take care of business at home. You take care of your family, and then you invest whatever is left. For we are not investing in people like Owen, right? We are not, again, the average age in this country is 20 years old, and we have, between the age of 18 to 34, we have 20 million people in that age group. That age group, a most productive across the world, more than age between 18 and 34, they have a lot of skills. That is the most productive age group. For that age group has almost a 70% unemployment rate. So the first thing we need to do is ask ourselves, how can we become Singapore? The people that are supposed to be the engine for that development growth, matiri na mawira.
All right.
Yeah.
Maundu aga ne maige ne marakigwe kana maundu ne maigaige hena kaundu Kimani wa Ichung'wa auga haha na kende gathomena ruthiomi rwa githungu niguo hihi tukugerie gugataura. There is no physical space within the budget.
Yes.
To roll out all development projects.
Yes.
And cannot be done through taxes.
Yes.
Ate kwaya gukorwo thirikari ndiri no hoti ucio.
Yes.
Wa gucokaniria mbeca cia ukuria tabarira citiganite na mbeca icio citingionekana na njira ya magoti. And the government ironekana ta itindikireirio handu kona-ini tondu wa mbere a Kenya ringi ni makirehire thina uhoro wigie magoti 2024 na wakere hagakorwo reke nguthomere maundu macio guo hena uhoro wigie limit ya maroni maria moetwo nginyagia riu na wagatatu gakorwo ati private sector ndironekana ina tamayo ya kwenda kuingira thini wa investment cia thirikari na macio ringi icio nicio opportunity iria thirikari ikoragwo nacio. Do you think this is the reason iratuma thirikari yanjirie gwetha another alternative in the name of guthie Singapore?
So that statement is partly true. Kugate, there is no fiscal space. Let's simplify it. For every 100 shillings fully today as income, for every 100 shillings, 75 dire. So debt service. There is no fiscal space. That is true. But the important question is, how did we get to this point where anything as a country? The truth of the matter is that it is so expensive. We have a very big government. We have a lot of politicians. Most of the money that's available to serve citizens is not, so we are paying a lot of people so much money. So that consumes a lot of that space. Because of all this corruption that we have every year, when we are losing 25%, 30% of the budget, 800 billion, when we start as a country, budget is 4.3 trillion. When you go down and you look at what did the money do, if I give you 4.3 trillion, go South Kenyans today, okay, with your 800 billion, you no longer have 4.3, now you have 3.5. The other thing that's killing this country is incompetence, now wastage, across government. The Akwera Goleto Geka study over the last 2 years. Where does the money go in every single department? For example, the Ministry of Health last year, in our budget year, 130 billion. Where did we actually spend this 130 billion? For example, 8.2 billion budget year, 130 billion went to interest on legal bills. Just imagine that. If you have a business that you're running, revenue or the income, that the money that comes in 130 billion ire. But then you find out that interest on bills, not the horo bills yenyewe, interest on legal bills 8.2 billion. You lose a lot of money because you can't serve anyone you're losing 8.2 billion just on interest alone. Interest ya bill ya lawyers ne 8.2 billion. What was the actual legal fee?
All right.
Anita? So the point is that as a country we have to ask ourselves, where does the money go? Now, Ogerora, when you take down and you look at what's happening across government, the corruption, it's a very big factor. We are losing almost 800 billion, but we're also losing even more money than that on incompetence. Or if I'm the government, or if I'm advising the government, if you're trying to serve Kenyans, the first thing you need to do to show leadership, I'm going to look at the entire government. Where does every shilling go? When you find that out, you fix that, and then if you go back to Kenyans, we don't have enough money. Kenyans can understand. Kenyans are not irrational.
All right.
No, Dogi, the answer to everything is to go sell projects, sell hope. Kenyans leadership. You have to show leadership and say, where is the money going? Let's do that first, and then we can go from there.
All right.
Yeah.
And ohoro wigie kunyihia the size ya thirikari. Tondu ndaigua gweta ati kindu kimwe hihi kiratuma thirikari ikarituhirwo ni gukorwo ati thirikari ni nene
muno
ina andu aingi inginyihio atia.
Tureke go example nigetha umenye kiria kiratuma juge cost ya thirikari nene. Bũrũri witũ last year twathondekire 2.5 trillion in income.
Mbeca cia magoti.
Yes. So our national income as a country yari 2.5 trillion. Last year budget ito as a country yari 3.8 trillion. So it is not different than you ugithondeka 250,000 a month ucoke uge maisha maku renda utumire 430,000. Okay, it's insane. You can't do that for a long time. Your income is 250,000, but you insist on spending 430,000. That's what we are doing. Sorry, 380,000. So last year we ended up borrowing 40%. As a country, 40% of what we spent last year was borrowed, and that is not different than what we had done the last 5 years. The last 5 years, we between 40% and 50% of what we spend every year. So we ask ourselves why we are doing this. Devolution in 2014, since 2014 to now, for you to do balanced budget. Balanced budget when you look at the money we make as a country and our expenses, so every year we spend more money, and we spend more money because we have 47 counties in this country. Every one of these counties requires help. Kuma outside. Try to give you the example of a county like Mandera County. Mandera County in our budget, I believe it's almost 15 billion, something like that. That county can only raise 1% budget. Every single year, almost 99% of the budget has to come from someone else. The average county for Oliwito, when it's only able to raise 10% of its budget. So every one of these counties, every month, they open their hand, that's the truth. At the national level, Dakwira, we made 2.5 trillion as a country, but our budget was 3.8. Even before you get to the county government, fully we right? Because you make 2.5, but your budget is 3.8. So you have an issue to begin with. But then you look at all the other counties, to the county to a large extent. So the question is, if devolution is supposed to be serving people, how do you serve people when not the national government and any of the county government are not able to support themselves? We have way too many politicians. The average county, so we have about 20,000 people for one politician. 20,000 people for one politician. Today, when you look at the population and you look at the number of politicians, they want one politician for every 166,000 people. So you have a very big disparity between some other countries, Nagoko. So you have a lot of politicians, and then the other thing is compensation. Mishara, the average governor for you, income yake is 74 times what the average citizen is making in that county. Take any county. So you have one governor making an income that is 74 times best idea mudu wakawaida labda taka county. the average MCA income yake ni 16 times what the average MCA citizen is making. There's a very big disparity. Then you combine that with the number of people we have so many politicians. That system is to make it so that when you look at 2.5 trillion when you look at that money and say, where does the money go? Very little gets to the people. We have so many people depending on that.
All right.
Yeah.
Mothe twaigua ta toi America. Riu hari ona kaundu kangi hihi tutanathikiriria miario ingi haha uguo.
Okay.
Na nĩ ngwenda noguo tũkĩgĩ nginya kanya ga kwarĩrio ũhoro wĩgiĩ Singapore na maũndũ macio mangĩ.
Yeah.
Ndende arauga atĩrĩrĩ, ũhoro ũyũ wothe ũbangĩtwo wa infrastructure fund na kĩ ũguo nĩ campaign nĩ message ya campaign ĩrathondekwo because now tũrorete harĩa gĩthurano-inĩ gĩa 2027 na thirikari no nginya yethe mbeca cia gũkinyĩrĩria tabarĩra ngũrani. If that is the case, angĩkorwo guo nĩguo rĩ, assuming that opinion is correct, ĩno ĩgũka na ngarama igana atĩa kũrĩ Mũkenya?
It is going to be disaster, Todo. And this, by the way, I have to agree with Ndinjiro Todo. You have to ask yourself, for only Dako example, Dakoida's secondary school capitation has gone down by 45%. Okay? As a country, what are our priorities? How do you go and start building infrastructure? It doesn't make any sense. It does not make sense. Ado marathi thibitari in this country magacoka mucii tondu SHA ndiratumika. Right? Torero wa thibitari SHA ndiratumika, wakinya thibitari wakora ndiratumika. But we are talking about infrastructure project. Ni kwaga leadership. Ni kwaga gukorwo twina accountability, because if you're accountable, you take care of the basics first. Basics are education, basics are healthcare, basics are to make sure that every Kenyan has the hope to get up tomorrow. Right? But when we are going around selling projects, infrastructure, accountability, why don't we talk about what we've done with the money that we have? Why don't we say, that's where you start. And if you show people that you've accounted for every single shilling, then you can say, look, we want to do more, but we can't to enough fiscal space. So when I look at all this, again, accountability. Study across government. It is so offensive to me president, instead of looking at the government and saying, we have a budget of over 4 trillion, no Kenyans are served. So as a leader, I want to know, why is it that we have 4.3 trillion this year, but then Kenyans don't feel that? Leadership is about looking at that. I want to know what is happening. I want to know, before we take any more shilling, where does the money go? And that's what Kenyans will do. Imagine this in your personal situation. Every single month you have but you always living paycheck to paycheck. You have to ask yourself, what am I doing wrong that is causing this? That 25% is left. 75 shilling of everyone, 75 shillings out of 100 to pay debt service. The reason why turakoboma thiri marigi na tukajia kuhigura ta limited liability company teo, we are just not being accountable. We are shifting, we call it kicking down the can. Instead of kuruta wirambulito kuga, where does the money go? Turaiga, you know what, we can't borrow any money anymore, which is what's happening. The reason for Uradi kuhigura kabuditeo is because we cannot go to the IMF anymore, we cannot go to World Bank anymore, we cannot go to any other globally respected financial institutions. They don't want to touch us. So well, you don't have money. You're making 2.5 trillion. Now you're spending 4.3 trillion. Now we don't want to give you any more money because you're risky. Because of that, what can we do now? Instead of saying, let's this 4.3 that we're spending what can we do now? To investors. It's just not being responsible. Yeah.
All right. Reke tuthikiririe mĩario ĩkĩrĩ o haha ũguo ĩgĩmainie na mathirĩ macio ũguo nĩguo tũranie kĩũria kĩmwe kana igĩrĩ tuthiĩte ũguo tuthikiririe mĩario ya Kimani wa Ichung'wa ũrĩa rĩngĩ marĩ na ndĩndĩ magĩcokanĩria kana makĩaria ũhoro wĩgiĩ mathirĩ ma bũrũri.
Borrowing should only happen for capital expenditure, which is for development. And if that is so, then Kenya has borrowed 4 trillion shillings in the last barely 3 years and 2 months. So that is enough money. And I want you to hear this. 4 trillion Kenya shillings is the money we have borrowed as a country. Close to 4 trillion in the last 3 years and 2 months. And 4 trillion shillings is the one we have borrowed, as I keep saying, in the official book of loans. There are other debts on the side which are borrowed illegally. So 4 trillion shillings, before we talk about the launching of trillion shillings fund, I would request those who are in government to come first and face Kenyans and tell them what the government has done with the 4 trillion Kenya shillings that Kenya has borrowed in the last 3 years and 2 months.
Every financial year, the Auditor General audits the national government and all county government books and asserts and ascertains where every shilling of public money has gone to. Without a doubt, this administration took over our economy when our economy was almost collapsing.
Orege acio ni abunge Kimani wa Ichung'wa mutongoria wa aria aingi thiini wa bunge ya bururi na mubunge wa kuria Kiharu Ndindi Nyoro magithukaniria meciria iguru rigie mathire ma bururi hario maundu maigana na meyumiria na nitukugwetete mamwe mamo ni ndaigua ta wa magweta thiini wa miario iria twakorwo twi nayo no ninge riria bururi ugukinya handu gatuika ati urakomba tondu gwiciria he andu Kimani wa Ichung'wa aritie uhoro ucio ona komerio ndikire nayo no riria bururi ugukinya handu gatuika ati urakomba niguo wanjiririe kuriha mishara na maundu maria mecokagira oro mweri-ri iyo ni statement ihana atia kwi economy ya bururi
ni gukorwo ni ukiga tondu tariu njiraga andu ingi think about the government as a person uge ati we ugikira rucini wo ukore you're making 100,000 a month na you cannot afford that. What do you do as a person? Most people are going to say no nginya ndore either reduce my expenses nigetha ngorwo ngihota guikara within this 100,000 kana jethe njira ingi ya ku substitute your income so that you can afford to live the way you want. That's what we expect from our government. If we are making 2.5 trillion as a country, why do we insist on spending 4.3? We have a very large government. We have people that are compensated very highly, but we don't want to show leadership. Okay, so how do we, when we engage in this discussion, Kenyans, if we are spending so much money, then let's look at first, can we increase income? To increase income, Kenyans are already heavily taxed. So what are the options do we have? Cost. If you're gonna look at cost, the government that we have, can we sustain that government? Last year, Dakwira authority 2.5 trillion as a country. We spent 50% of that 2.5 trillion kulihado mishara ya thirikari at the national government who are 1 million people. So our country in 50 million, tutumira 50% of the national income kuliha mishara ya 1%, which is 2%. Uwona kuga right off the start, we've lost 50% of the national income to 2% of the population. Our debt service in Dakwira debt service last year yale 1.6 trillion. So you've lost 50%, the national revenue on 2% of the population. Do they have debt service? Do you have to a single shilling to the county government? When the money goes to the county government, what does the money do? 45% of that money goes to pay salaries at the county government level. The average county government for Rio educated 1% of the county population. So for example, my county of Kiambu, which has 2.5 million people, educated less than 1% of the population. So the national government wabirie na gote 50% ya income, watuma 400 billion to the county government, lose 45% of the income. No, when you look at all this money, by the time you look at just compensation by itself, you've lost a huge chunk of the money. But to smart, why is it that we are now serving Kenyans when you have this money? Our solution is to go by the That's why the government has borrowed almost 4 trillion in the last 4 years. Now, it's a very important question, a simple one. Hit by 40% within 3 years. What have we gotten out of that? What did we get? If you are a parent or at a high school, you have seen your capitation go down from 22,000 to 12,000. So how can these two things don't make sense? The Waito has by 40%, and the secondary school capitation by 45%. Where did the money go? And when you ask that question, I have some answers for you. Study within the last, just looking at the last 2 years in government. Let me give you a couple of my findings. And I'm just looking at this information just one of those 2 years. 2023, 2024, 370 billion in pending bills. Pending bills, let's take for example the health department. Health department in a budget 130 billion. By the end of the year, instead of spending 130 billion, but 170 billion. So that means that some of the bills that came were not paid. That's how you end up with pending bills. So how do you end up with pending bills? You know your income and you have your projected expenses. How do you end up with so much in pending bills? Do you end up in pending bills to do corruption? Or the Ministry of Health needed to spend 130 billion, but someone stole 10 billion. 10 billion that came in as invoices, that's how you end up with pending bills. The other thing that happens is that incompetence in general. Example, last year, the Ministry of Health, in our budget, 130 billion, but 8.2 billion alone went to interest. So if 8.2 billion interest, how much was the actual legal bill? So you shouldn't be surprised because the legal bill was 30 billion, kind of 40 billion. So now you've taken almost 50 billion from serving people. That was not budgeted for. When you're doing your forecasting, nobody is going to say at the nitoka 10 billion. Kana nitoka we pay 8.2 billion. So because of that incompetence, we end up in this situation. Another finding that I have: avoidable and wasteful interest charges. This is one of the most devastating things in United Todo. Give you an example of the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health, actually, let me give another example. Kenya National Highway Authority. It's supposed to be the engine for growth. Almost every single finding, Auditor General found that in almost every contract, our country is losing hundreds of millions or billions in interest. For example, get a company contract, invoice, you're supposed to pay by this date. For some reason, to bureau bill in additional interest of 1.2 billion. Another contract, contract, to bureau invoice, we get hit with 856 million in interest. Examples like that are just non-stop. The Auditor General's report. So now just on interest alone, we've lost 32 billion. I'm talking about Mokomwe. 32 billion worth of interest that could have been avoided. So when I look at the present around the country, we need another 5 trillion. How can you take care of that 5 trillion if you cannot save Kenyans 32 billion in interest?
All right.
So this money did not have to be lost. If you have smart people, are the responsible people, you don't lose 32 billion. Yeah.
So then, tareke tobe tucokero haria miario-ini yo na he kaundu kangi gakoretwo gakiyumiria na no nyende haha ututhathaurire niguo tukinyite niki kirathie na mbere. Hena kiria kiretu mathire maria mari mabuku-ini ma thirikari na nimo macio Mheshimiwa Ndindi Nyoro arauga riu makirie gukinya ciringi tiririoni 4. Na hena mathire maria marerwo off the government books.
Yes.
Difference ya maundu maya meri ihana atia na mbeca iria hihi ciikigena-ini giki kana cigwikirwo kigena-ini giki kia infrastructure fund ri, is it an illegal fund?
Yeah. So Ndindi Nyoro akiarihorwa 4 trillion, he was talking about the ria tuoete kuma President Ruto atuika president. The gukwirite in 2022 our national debt yari 8.6 trillion. Within the last 4 years, that number has gone from that 8.6 trillion to almost 12 trillion or more. So it's an additional almost 4 trillion. When Kenyans maigua tuna thiri muingi makoiga atiriri, how is it possible tondu you just told me at the last year tutumire 1.6 trillion kuriha thiri mwaka uyu ri out of our 4.3 trillion in budget tugutumira 1.9 trillion kuriha thiri riu Kenyans makaigua turatumira mbeca nyingi thiri but thiri witu nduranyiha. So that's the question you're asking. Is there odious debt? Basically nikio kiori yaku odious kuga ati hera thiri twinaguo utari legitimate, right? I have looked at that issue of odious debt. Now, there is a good chance that a small amount of that debt is not real. Daiga small kugate out of that 12 trillion in debt.
Hale trillion
yeah. Out of the 12 trillion
okay, 12 okay,
the total 12 trillion. Maybe my own estimate would be maybe 20%, 25% is odious. So, this is what happens. There was a big scandal within the last 3 months when we realized that within the last, I think it was 5 years, 2018 to 2023, Twakobire 2.97 trillion within that period, that 5-year period. But the money that actually can be accounted for, was only 2.6. Oh, there was 300 billion in money that was, nobody can say what happened to it. So, there is a good chance that some of this balance, some of this debt, 12 trillion, still legitimate.
All right.
But that's not the most important thing in my view. The most important thing is to say, why do we have all that debt? Why do we have all that? If we focus on Kugate, the reward and the legitimate, we lose sight of the fact that we are misbehaving in a way that is causing this debt. Dakwera, we have a very large government that is consuming almost 70% of every single shilling to another issue on a very 1 or 2% of the population. So that is a serious issue that needs to be controlled. The other issue near corruption. We are losing so much money to corruption. Odious debt today. We ignore these other things that are just as important.
All right.
Yeah.
So riu mutaratara wa guthondeka fund ino nayo. Ohana atia kuringana nawe. Ni urona turarumirira mutaratara uria ubati.
Ni ndakwira when I look at this whole thing, it's a scam. It's a scam, and I hate to say that to be disparaging, but it's a way of avoiding responsibility. Thirikari irathi kahigura a private company, limited liability company, nigetha ikorwo na access to capital, nigetha andu moke investors moige okay, now we're going to put money. The reason why thirikari ireka uguo ni tondu ni yaga mbeca cia gwika development. Normal companies, normal countries, normal governments, they borrow in the name of the government. If we want to do a port, if we want to do an airport, if we want to do a railway, as a country we go and say we want investment, we want loans, come and give us. But nobody wants to talk to you anymore. So our financial institutions globally recognized because they know that we are spending 75% of every single shilling not their service. So when if I'm the CEO of a bank, now I'm trying to answer the question, why did you give Kenyan money? I corrow 75% of every single shilling is going to debt service. What told you at the Kenyan ratio? So because of that question, if I'm the CEO, no, I don't want to touch Kenya. Then the other option, the government has to go to the World Bank, IMF, but even those ones have decided Kenya. So what the government has done is they came in and started borrowing locally, the Equity Bank, the other local banks. Last year, when you look at the total debt that we had, 51% our debt as a country, the domestic borrowing. Meaning, the Equity Bank, the Kenya Commercial Bank, 49% external. But when you look at the interest expense, 70% domestic, 30% external. For every shilling talk or better for you, we paid a lot more in interest relative to what we paid to external debt. That is disastrous. So it tells you a lot of things. The first thing it tells you, we've gone to a point where still not access to financing. When you go to the World Bank, when you go to IMF, when you go to other institutions in the US and other places, so we've accepted we no longer have access to financial funding or financial to capital. So we now come and borrow locally at very high interest rates. You don't go to Kenya Commercial Bank, go at 20% when you know you can go to equity or at 12%. So the reason why you go to equity where you're paying so much money, so much in interest, is because you have no other options. Even that has now closed. Even locally, we're having trouble. So now how do we go about doing everything we want to do? Oh, what can we do? Let's start a limited liability company. Now we are actually taking equity from investors. We are hoping that Meko ignore this fundamental reality that our cash flow is not there to support anything that we want to do.
So in this case, rĩu mũtaratara-inĩ ũcio rĩ, harĩa ndenda hihi ũtũcorere mbica ũrĩa kũhana rĩ, investors aya private investors nĩ mbeca megũka gwĩkĩra kĩgĩna-inĩ kĩu ĩ,
yes,
kana nĩ mbeca makũhũthĩra thĩinĩ wa kĩrĩa thirikari ĩkoretwo ĩkiuga nĩ ĩrahũthĩra mũtaratara wa PPP.
Yeah. If you and I, because this is very simple when you think about it in personal terms. When I talk to investors, and I'll give you the example. We want to develop real estate. We open a company. We call it, Kenya Real Estate. How do we raise capital? How do we raise capital to do these projects? We have generally two options. One, to do it fair, to achieve development. But to do that, you need to show the bank that you have the ability to pay it back, right? Most times.
So nginya hau rĩ, Kenya rĩu ĩronania nĩ tetarĩ na ũhoti ũcio.
The Kenyans, because if you can do that, then you don't need to establish the limited liability company. I correct win ability to service debt. We have no reason to set up a limited liability company. We just need to go to a bank and say, hey, give us 100 billion or 200 billion to do this. But now those doors have closed. So now we say, let me go and establish a different entity. Netawe personally loan so that when you go to a bank, more information I'm not going to do that. Well, let me go and call my sister to get to ajiga company. Now, when you go to the bank, instead of going as you, we are coming as a limited liability company. But that does not negate the fact that you have cash flow issues. On Ogeneo Capital, Nefegio, you still have issues repaying the debt. So in this case, Kenya Koiga, we don't want to deal with lenders. So now we want investors. We are hoping that Matara is smart, right? But Matara is sophisticated. So they give you money in capital, and then you go do these things. But at the end of the day, even those people, they have to be paid. Nobody gives you money without an expectation they are going to get a profit. So if you are a smart person, if you come to me and you say, do you want to invest in the government? You go, no, I'm not going to do it. Although I've already seen that over the last 10 years, they spend way more money than they make. They are fiscally irresponsible. Now, instead of understanding what is causing that, they prefer to run around taking more loans here, and then when they don't have access to loans, now they come up with scams. Let's establish a limited liability company. We take money from investors. How do you think you're going to get paid, honestly? If you go and give money to that limited liability company, where do you think the money is going to come from? As a country, income is 2.5 trillion. Now our debt service alone this year is 1.9 trillion.
All right.
So there's no money to pay you.
Okay. Yeah. Reke twambe tuikirie oro hanini murori wa Kameme TV umuthi twareria ciegie uigithia nanga niguo point ciume wega no nginya citukanio na no nginya tucamithie gathungu kidogo na riu umuthi karauma na maniuru kidogo twambe tuikirie oro hanini ni turacokereria turore bara ya guthie Singapore ikarete atia ina rami ni twambitie tugakinya kuu ri ni tugukorwo tukirwo oro haha ni mutaramu uria twinake gathengie mutambo.
Kameme TV.
Why wait for fun? K24.digital brings you 24/7 entertainment. From the pitch to the playlist, from celebrity gossip to the memes you love. We're not just news, we're your non-stop ticket to everything cool and trending. So get in the know. K24.digital. Follow the buzz 247.
Ngoro yakwa nĩ gũkwambararia ĩkũgocage hingo ciothe, we wanjamithirie irathimo ciaku ũgĩtũma nduĩke mũira wa ũtonga waku. Nĩ thengio nĩ marĩa ũnjĩkagĩra, ona ngũhĩtĩirie no ũthiaga na mbere na kũndathima, na nĩkĩo ndoiga ngoro yakwa ĩgũtũũre thererũkĩte ĩgũcokagĩria ngatho nĩ marĩa ũnjĩkagĩra. Rũgambi rũrũ rwa ngoro yakwa rũthondeketwo rũtuĩke wĩira kũrĩ andũ arĩa marakũhũrĩra, rĩrĩa marakũhũrĩra magathikĩrĩria mawĩko marĩa Ngai agwĩkĩire.
Kwĩgwatĩra Skiza Tune ngoro yakwa, hihinya *811 *487# wĩgwatĩra Skiza Tune ngoro yakwa ta rũgambi thimũ-inĩ yaku ũmũthĩ ũkeni arĩa othe marakũhũrĩra thimũ *811 *487#.
Ĩĩ no wende andũ arĩa makũrigicĩirie, arata hamwe na bamĩrĩ yaku mũikarage na thayũ na mũkenete. Nyitanagĩra naniĩ Ngũgĩ wa Karanja ngĩgũtereba thĩinĩ wa tabarĩra ya kwĩbanga gũkũ gwa Kameme TV.
Ũrathiĩ gũcokora thimũ na thimũ ĩyo ti yaku.
Tigai kwaria mbere ya ciana.
Athuri mendaga leadership, koguo angĩkorwo mũthuri waku ndoĩ ikara ũguo mũrĩ akĩĩgu.
Oro mũthenya wa Kiumia kwambĩrĩria thaa 4 cia ũtukũ nginyagia thaa 6.
Wona thĩna kĩũra rũga.
Kũmũtwarĩra ihũa kũmũhe chocolate, o mũndũ ena rũthiomi rwake.
Nĩ mũndũ amenye mũtumia wake akenaga rĩ, tiga gũthaka na mũndũ mwarĩ ndũgũ nake, angĩkorwo nĩ ũrenda kũrũgamia mũciĩ waku.
Tũkũrehagĩra ageni mwaki magagũtara.
It's all about communication.
Kwĩyaria, kwĩitũrũra, ũkahũtha ngoro yaku, nawe ũgatigwo ũkĩbanga.
Maũndũ maya no gũbangwo.
Ambĩrĩria
harĩa ũrĩ na kĩrĩa wĩ nakĩo. Good. We wĩbange.
Nĩtwacokereria tũgĩthiĩ na mbere na tabarĩra ya Arahũka rĩkĩratha rũcinĩ rũrũ ũmũthĩ, na tũrarongoreria ũhoro wĩgiĩ kĩgĩna kĩa ũkũria wa bũrũri kĩrĩa na rũthiomi rwa gĩthũngũ kĩretwo Infrastructure Fund, na ningĩ kũrora nĩ atĩa bũrũri ũgũkũra nginyagia ikĩro-inĩ iria president akoretwo akĩerirĩria bũrũri atĩ no ũgĩkinye gũkorwo ũrĩ ũmwe wa mabũrũri marĩa makoragwo marĩ kĩrathi kĩa mbere ta mabũrũri marĩa makoragwo thĩinĩ wa gĩtarũ kĩa Asia, gĩtarũ kĩa Amerika, ona Ngeretha kana tũkiuge Rũraya. No ũrĩa bũrũri hihi ũgũkinya ũguo nĩkuo kwĩna warĩ na ciũria nyingĩ. Reke twambe tũthikĩrĩrie mĩario ya President William Ruto akĩaria ũhoro wĩgĩmainie na itanya rĩake na ihenya rĩrĩa hihi aratanya bũrũri nĩ ũgũkinyanĩria maũndũ maya naguo.
Hiyo plan ya trilioni 5 tumeanza jana, and by next year we will be halfway. Nyinyi mnanielewa? Wengine wanasema haiwezekani, lakini mimi najua inawezekana. Si walituambia hii barabara tulianzisha ya kujenga kutoka Kitale kwenda kupitia mpaka Nakadoko haiwezekani? Hiyo barabara imekamilika ama bado? Si hiyo barabara tumejenga? Ni kweli ama si kweli? Walituambia walimu kuajiri 1,100 haiwezekani. By January we will have hired 100,000 teachers. Walituambia mambo ya SHA haiwezekani. As I talk to you, wananchi 28.5 million Kenyans are registered in SHA. Nimesimama hapo, watu ambao wanaendesha mahospitali hapa wananiambia SHA is working. Wale ambao wanatuambia SHA is not working is because hawajakuwa wagonjwa. Siku watakuwa wagonjwa ndio watajua SHA inafanya kazi. Nyinyi mnanielewa my friends? Na vile vile nimesema ya kwamba we must build an extra 28,000 kilometers.
I think government has no luxury in promises and has no luxury in giving grandiose plans. The precise reason a sitting government is given that position is not to keep on promising. They have the responsibility to keep on informing Kenyans on what they are doing, not what they intend to do. Because output is measured by what has already happened. Output is not measured by what by the amount of promises.
O rĩngĩ mĩario hau ya atongoria President William Ruto akĩaria ũhoro wĩgiĩ kĩoneki kĩu arĩ nakĩo kĩgiĩ bũrũri na auga atĩ gũkinyĩria mweri wa mwaka ũkĩte tũgakorwo twĩ nuthu ya harĩa ndeciria rĩu angĩkorwo matanya nĩ ciringi tiririoni 5 rĩ it would mean that account ĩno ĩgakorwo na kĩndũ ta 2.5 trillion. How practical how ũndũ ũcio wĩna ũmohana atĩa kũringana nawe?
Thĩna mũno ti gũkorwo, it's not whether mbeca icio magakorwo makinyĩtie 2.5. That's not the question. The question is magakorwo na mbeca icio cigathikwo.
Ndũ nĩ marakiuga kwĩna tabarĩra nyingĩ the four pillars iria president akoretwo akĩgweta na sometimes akauga nĩ ithatũ.
Ũguo example ndakwĩra last year study no ngoretwo gĩka kũrora where did the money go, and I used last year as an example. 3.8 trillion we spent. Where did the money go? Tondũ kũrĩa mbeca cirathire, that's 3.8 is the same place mbeca icio tũkũ raise with this fund cigũthiĩ. That's the truth. In the last 3 years bũrũri ũkombete 4 trillion under this president. Kenyans matige kwĩra mbeca cirathire kũ. Ndakwĩra example ya capitation, it's down, right? It's down 45%. Wathiĩ thibitarĩ ndũraheo service, ndũrona infrastructure development around the country. Our standard of living has gone down when our debt has gone up by 40%. I want to give you a couple of examples. And because I'm going to use this, the president's statement to this project, arali horo wayo, iko execute ni Department ya thirikari ta Kenya National Highway Authority, KENHA. Iyo ni iko thoreka fara ino.
Farafara ya
no. Iyo arali horo wayo.
Ino ya kuma Rironi guthie Mau Summit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when this money is deposited the account here, let's look at where it's gonna go. Dakwira last year, this same department, ikanagera motor contract ya I think it was about 2 billion. Tukatumiro invoice ni contractor. Tutire smart enough kumenya tukarĩha thirĩ icio rĩ. Tukarega kũrĩha thirĩ. Tukatumiro ni contractor invoice yake plus 856 million in interest. Okay? That's just one example. The same department, Kenya National Highway Authority, ikanagana mundu ge contract, agatutumira invoice, tukarega kuriha, tugatumiro bill, magacoka makongerera 756 million in interest. Another contract, tukarega mundu, agatutumira invoice, tukarega kuriha, tugatumiro bill na interest ya 1.2 billion. Okay? Contract yege, tukarega mundu ge, agatumira invoice, tukarega kuriha, twagire kuriha, tugatumiro invoice, magacoka makongerera 756 million. Contract ige tukanagera mundu atumira invoice tukarega kuriha tugatumira bill ya mbeca iria twakiguithanĩirie magacoka makongerera 650 million in contract. All this interest rally horo wacio ni department mwe ya thirikari mwaka ũmwe. It's one government. It's a call. So you have to ask yourself, angĩkorwo ũreciria kũinvest handũ rĩ kambuni rĩ, and then you talk to the people that have invested money before. This is what happened to us. It went down a hole, a dark hole. What tells you that your money is going to be different? How is your money different? Your money is not special. Where money went before, money will go in the future.
All right. Now, wathikĩrĩria maũndũ maya mothe rĩ, ũthikĩrie nginya atongoria ta acio makĩaria.
Yeah.
Nĩona tũrathoma ũteti hihi na motive cia kiũteti thĩinĩ wa plan ino yothe?
Ici nĩ siasa peke yake, to be honest with you. Na I think thĩna mũnene twĩnaguo thirikari bũrũri ũyũ ngwĩciria nĩ kwaga accountability. I mean, I don't expect the Ruto administration to hold itself accountable. They're going to do whatever they need to do to be in power. Na witũ nĩ andũ arĩa magĩrĩirwo gũkorwo me protectors of the average citizen. And I'm talking about Parliament. Parliament should be asking this president, in the last 3 years, our national debt is sitting at 40%. Where did that money go? And what did you do with that money? How did you serve Kenyans? But nobody is talking about that. When the president another 5 trillion, without having accounted for the 4 trillion that he's taken, how can we? Nobody can conduct themselves like that, particularly in the private sector. That, I always like to compare government with the private sector. Agikorwo we ni CEO wa company ri, and you're telling your shareholders over the last 4 years, 3 years, the Rewito as a company has gone up by 40%. Shareholders are going to ask you, what did you do with the money? And what did we get as shareholders in return? What profit did we get? So that's the same question talking to Korea, President Ruto. You've borrowed, you've taken our debt from 8.6 trillion to 12 trillion, 40% growth. Where did the money go and where is our return? You need to answer that question before we allow you to take any more debt. Yeah.
All right. Ke tuhuti hanini uhoro wege mainie na mitaratara ĩrĩa rĩngĩ ĩngĩbatarania kũhũthĩka agĩkorwo bũrũri wa Kenya nĩ ũgakinya gĩkĩro-inĩ gĩa bũrũri ta wa Singapore na ndĩrageragia gwĩka ũthuthuria ũguo oro hanini na ndĩrona atĩ ũmwe wa ataaramu marendekithia atĩrĩrĩ Kenya ĩrabatara gũkorwo na kĩndũ gĩtagwo annual economic growth kana ũrĩa ĩrakũra oro mwaka ĩkũre na gatagatĩ ga gĩcunjĩ kĩa 7 na 8 thĩinĩ wa mĩaka 30 nĩguo tũkinye Singapore.
Yeah.
Nĩ ũtekanĩria na maũndũ ta macio?
I agree with that, but that's not the only thing that we need to do. Ogu Oraiga 7.5% growth rate, it just gives you some of the information, not all the information. Even if we do that as a country to call it 7.5 trillion, you know, the other thing you need to look at is how much money are we spending on debt? If I tell you that they go kukira musara every year by 7.5, right? Within 30 years, how much money can I have saved? Let it go. That's what you're talking about as a country. But in that calculation, if my income is going up by 7.5%, what about my debt? What am I spending on debt? Now, 7.5, by maybe the cost of debt by 25%. Or the cost of debt, because if you're making 100,000 a year, I give you 7.5% interest. So now your income is 107,500. But if your cost of debt, 20,000, you're really not making progress. It is true that we need a lot of high growth, but that's not the only thing. The other thing, what are we spending on debt? And if that is so disastrous, then to Singapore.
All right.
Yeah.
Aya, kaundu kangi karia ndironire karia yumirie gatagata-ini ka ataramu ni ati bũrũri wa Singapore niguo ukure ukinye haria wakinyire na ihinda riria wahuthirire wakorirwo wina uhoro wa kwendia indo nja wa bũrũri muno gukira kugura nja wa bũrũri kiria twetaga export and import.
Yeah.
Ataramu akiuga atĩrĩrĩ, it was more export driven than import driven.
Yes.
Kenya ni import driven.
Yes.
Na ngũthomera statistics ici haha niguo hihi ututeithie kumenya ni ate maundu maya mangicenjanio angikorwo ucio ni undu ungibatarania gwikwo. 2023 Kenya ya importire indo cia ciringi trilioni 2.6 na export indo cia trilioni 1. Riu tugubatarania gwika ate niguo Kenya twikore ati we are exporting more than we are importing?
Yeah. So the best way to think about that question is, what is Singapore exporting? What is Singapore exporting? Singapore has 6 million people. They don't have diamonds, material na oil, material na gold. They don't have a lot of resources. What they export is services, skills. When you look at most companies in the world, most companies in a subsidiary kind of operation in Singapore. Na sidia Singapore niramenya they have a very highly skilled workforce. If I'm an engineering company na ndirathi around the world kuona contract, for example, maybe I want to come to Kenya, bid contract ya waka a windmill, kana some type of maybe an airport or highway. Singapore, because of its expertise, let's say I have a subsidiary here in Kenya, I bid on a contract. As a global company, I might have to go to my Singapore subsidiary to help us service this contract. Expertise. So that's how Singapore is exporting its brains, and that's how Singapore is earning money. As a country, if we want to be in that kind of a position, the thing that we need to do is find ways to produce things or services that the world needs.
For example, tarau tondu thirikari na ikoretwo ikiuga I think over the last 3 or so years nĩ hotete gũtwara andũ ta 500,000 njari. Is that what you mean by exporting?
No. Because when you export people, like a good example, if I send you to Dubai, I have exported a human being. I did not bring money to Kenya. Todo, let's say for example, let's say you go to Dubai, only hold 100,000. What that 100,000, ogo to Dubai, ogo le tax Dubai. Ogo the ole nyumba Dubai, ogo the ole irio Dubai, wadhifta in Dubai. So out of this 100,000, maybe you're able to save 10,000 or 15,000. And out of that, some of it, oiki account in yaku, maybe you're able to send 5,000 or 7,000 to feed your family back here. No, what we got was very little, a remittance. This is not exporting things out of the country. Exporting things to Kugate, I have a skill set, local, that someone in America needs or someone in Israel needs. Ogu magaoka makahe detuge if we have a company here in Kenya, I want to give you a contract to go service my client. So now besa siyo kafururi. Anita, if this company gives you 100,000 for a Kenyan employer, that entire 100,000 is earned in Kenya, is taxed in Kenya, igatuteithia gukorona pesa kuliha guthondeka infrastructure thibitari. That's what that means. So when you're sending a human being, it's actually very shameful to uroiga ati as a country tutire na ability ya kuishiria how we can use these people here in the country. We are talking about wanting to be Singapore. Adore marathi Dubai na Saudi Arabia and all these other countries, they're very young Kenyans. Nobody who is 60 is going to Dubai. Nobody who is 50 is going to those places. They're about between 20 and maybe 40. These are the most productive people. So Toikara as a Floritoiga, we have no ingenuity. We have no smart people that can think about how can we use these people in our economy. Toiga, we are going to act as a broker of services, a talent agency. We are going around the country saying, I'm going to send you to Singapore, I'm going to send you to Dubai. They surrender. We have no ability. Exactly. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So how do we reverse this? I think that is the question.
So all these things are related to, if we want to be Singapore, then we need to ask ourselves, how did Singapore become Singapore? And the answer is to invest in Kenyans.
All right.
To invest in Kenyans so that we have a lot of people that are highly skilled. When companies are thinking about if I want to go to Africa, I can either go to South Africa, I can go to Tanzania, I can go to Ethiopia, I can go to Egypt, but I'm going to prefer Kenya to do. There are a lot of smart people who can do the work that I need.
All right.
So you do that, now you bring in money, we can expect more services, and Kenyans are able to earn a living. People are able to pay taxes.
All right.
Yeah.
Haya, kaundu kange karia nako rĩngĩ karakiheanwo ta rĩandĩkithia rĩa atĩ kangĩkwo hihi no tũkinye kũrĩa Singapore.
Yeah.
And by the way, tondu we nĩ ũgĩthiangĩte ũguo wahota gũtwĩra kana Singapore nĩ kũraihu. Andũ matigagĩkorwo magĩciria no korwo nĩ na haha tũraikũrũka na haha kĩanda.
Yeah.
Atĩ bũrũri wa Kenya, economy ya Kenya nĩ ĩkoragwo ĩnyitĩtwo mũno nĩ maũndũ ma excessive regulation, mĩtaratara ya kũhũra biacara, kĩndũ kĩretwo overlapping mandates, yani gwakorwo kwĩna aya nĩ mararuta wĩra ũyũ at the same time wĩra ũyũ nĩ ũrarutwo nĩ andũ angĩ na bureaucracy kũritũhia mĩtaratara ya nginya kũgĩa approvals na maũndũ mangĩ ta macio ũguo. So maũndũ maya rĩ nĩ mawatho marabatara gũcenjio bũrũri-inĩ kana nĩ atĩa kũrabatara and kũringana na ataramu rĩ Singapore nĩ yahũthirie mawatho mayo ĩkĩdigitize maũndũ ma thirikari. Nĩ tũiguĩte thirikari gũkũ ĩkĩaria ũhoro wĩgiĩ digitization. So nĩ watho ũrabatara gũcenjia kana nĩkĩ?
Oh, that's very true. That is very true. And I go for example ya my own personal experience. A few years ago, ndajetie kambuni gũkũ ya distribute nutritional supplements. Ndagũraga product ici Canada, ngacirehe gũkũ Kenya, distribute. Okay? In order for me to do that, that made it about 2 years when you go through the approval process, or the Pharmacy and Poisons Board and other places, they look at all these products already go import. They undertake studies at the the lives of Kenyans. So again, it took about 2 years. Just think about that even before I get to the issue. Agĩkorwo tũracompete na Tanzania na Uganda. If Uganda can do that work within 3 months, most people that are thinking about kwanjia biashara mekuga, I don't want to wait 2 years, I want to do it in 3 months, because why should I have to wait 3 years? Nobody is going to do that if you have other options. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that on a reda korona approval issue, anytime I wanted to buy these products, okay, remember that took me the 2 years of corona approval process. But every single time I buy a product, Kuma Canada, the first thing I have to do is to go back to Pharmacy and Poisons Board. They've already approved these products. But every single time that I click purchase, I have to take that purchase order, they me to our Pharmacy and Poisons Board, marry the same products, approve it, and that takes time. And oftentimes when we don't offer you to get these approvals, you have to bribe someone at the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. If you get that approval, then you go from there, you go to Kenya Revenue Authority, Makuda get invoice your taxi, and before you get that, you have to pay someone. I'm just giving you examples. So this entire thing makes it very difficult for companies to operate. So if I'm buying a product, and let's say I spend 100,000 shillings, when I click purchase, the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, domino wiki kadhaa, joka muhuko dehe modu nigada approve something that's already done. When I'm done with that, the Kenya Revenue Authority, dehe modu bribe. Then I buy the products. As soon as they land in Kenya, I have 34% tax. Okay? I have invested so much money and so much time in this process. When I get that product, then I start distributing. It is very difficult to earn a profit in this kind of a situation. Or you cannot even predict what is your cost. How much did you spend on each product? Because those you have to pay a bribe that is maybe 5% of the product. The other day is 15%. Oh, the issue of regulation and the issue of incompetence, I just call it incompetence. When you're forcing someone like me to go back to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board every single time for nothing. I mean, there's no value when I have to go back every single time. There's no value. But we do it because we want to shake down business people and citizens. So that's a real issue. And it's a very, very big issue in terms of grow the economy. Yeah.
So in this case, comparing na taru kuratuika Singapore ni kuhuthia huthirie mawatho mayo na ni kuratuika Kenya ringi mawatho ni maingi kana ni marumie regulation ni dito.
Yeah.
How do we go about it?
We need to be purposeful. We need to have what I call common sense na business sense. Ugundukugate with thirikari, pick whatever department. Modo igira your department akwire, I am here because I want a certain permit. You have to ask yourself, what are they trying to do and how can I help them? That's the first thing. Uge modo no Kenya, idea kwa biashara. How do I help this person succeed? If you start with that approach, you're interested in minimizing around with, yeah? So you regulate, of course, because you don't want a situation where there's no regulation, but it needs to make sense. It needs to make common sense. The things that you're asking are needed. That's the first thing. The second thing is you're calling a business sense. You're competing with a lot of other countries. Ask yourself, if I'm a business, now the Tanzania, now the Ethiopia, now the South Africa, why do you think I'll come to you? That's business. You're making a business decision. So what we need is common sense and business sense at the government's purpose. The government's purpose is to serve people, including businesses. Because businesses, if you come up with regulation that does not make sense, that is illogical, that is irrational, that does not make common sense and business sense, investors go where they don't have to deal with nonsense like that. Yeah.
In terms of incentives, iria thirikari ifati ni kuheana ringi kwi andu aria mena potential ya gukorwo ringi me investors, what areas do you think thirikari ifati go focus nayo?
The biggest investment or the biggest incentive thirikari gihe individuals and businesses to succeed is to do the least that it needs to do to get in the way. In other words, don't get in the way of success. So when you're talking about individuals, don't overtax people. Don't overtax people so that people have more disposable income. When people have disposable income, they go spend. When you have, if you're making 100,000 and we take 40%, then you have 60,000 left, right? That limits what you can do. But if we take 20 and leave you with 80, then these 20 that you have, you may be able to take your family more to go to Korea, or maybe you got to, your family somewhere over the weekend. That's how people do. So the first thing we need to do is don't get in the way of people. Don't overtax people. And the other thing is when you reduce corruption. Corruption is not just at the best and the what corruption does is it distorts the market. That if you and I are running a company individually with a company and let's say we are doing a private hospital. Agekorwo where when you when a patient comes in, okada get a modern service, but you have to pay 20% or 30% to a government official. And I don't have to do the same. You and I cannot compete the same way. After a while, you're going to be out of business. So corruption, it distorts the market. If government wants to help individuals and business succeed, you deal with corruption, you make it a level playing field, and you have transparency. Yeah.
All right. Ndenda njoke hanini thutha horo cio tukwaritie wegemaini na infrastructure fund na hena mĩario ĩraritio ni minister wa Kigina, John Badi, na akauga atiriri, it was in the argument ya kana Kigina giki ni gibati gukorwo ki rungu rwa watho muna, akauga atiriri Kigina giki gitibati gukorwo ki rungu rwa any act of parliament. Is that the case?
So, what is the motivation? Just think about that statement. Why would anyone say that this process is outside of the law? Because that's what he's suggesting. The reason why you would do that, you don't want accountability. If you want accountability, and if you are serving Kenyans and you're honest that you're serving Kenyans, then you have no reason to resist accountability. Anita. The same person, I think it was a few months ago, Ali recorded Akira Kenyans that we need to accept, or we need to be open-minded to corruption. At the best say you, I going to prove more you got at invest. That's the same type of mentality. What I'm saying is it's not conjecture. He's recorded Akirado at the Kenyans. Why you only? To be open-minded to get I call to tia hota gutora igotini to charge what you convicted, then let's open ourselves at the invest. It's the same type of mentality. If you are serving Kenyans, you have no reason to try and do things outside the law. Yeah.
So in the event that nigego, and by the way, difference ya liria tuge tondu turari na minister haha wa utungata wa muingi na arauga ati Kigina giki nigigutwarwo kuria thiini wa bunge.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between githie ke debate ne ya bunge na possibly mahetukie na gukorwo ki rungu rwa act of parliament? What is the difference?
So remember, in a private company, it's a limited liability company. So he's trying to say, let's assume this is not a government deal. This is not a deal that's being done on behalf of Kenyans. Because let's go back to the example that I gave you. You and I, we set up this real estate development company. We don't have to deal with the government, right? Because it's private individuals. But we know how to keep ourselves accountable. I look at the books every month. I can see the money that's coming in. But when you're conducting business on behalf of Kenyans, you cannot do that outside of the law. You cannot do that outside of our country's ability to oversight what is happening. Or the idea that because we are going through a limited company to accountability, it's nonsense. Yeah, sorry.
All right. Toguthi uguo turekereirie Bwana Mwangi tondu ithaa ritu nario no riragithi uguo gitutindikite oro uguo. No riu tugithi uguo turekereirie hihi ona ngikuheaga kanya ga kuga ciugo cia muthia Angĩkorwo ũndũ ũyũ nĩ ũgakinyanĩra ũkuoya ihinda ta rĩigana atĩa kũringana nawe?
Gũthiĩ Singapore? The first thing is, if we do the right things to get, first of all, to menye how did Singapore become Singapore? If we did that, and we start doing those things, now let me be quick. Singapore became Singapore. Singapore became Singapore because number one, but yeah, that kind of corruption. So if you do that, then we don't lose 800 billion every year. That's the first thing. They save 800 billion. The second thing Singapore did was, they did not waste money. So every single shilling, the last shilling that they have. So they think very seriously before they spend any shilling. That's not what we're doing. For example, last year, 32 billion in interest. Last year, pending bills by 370 billion. Pending bill happens for two reasons. Number one, because of the country, 3.8 billion, but we ended up with more bills, 370 billion than we intended. So why did we do that? Two reasons. One, the second reason is incompetence. For example, our Ministry of Health lost 8.2 billion in interest. The Kenya National Highway Authority, in one example, we lose 1.2 billion. Another example, we lose 756 million in interest. Another example, 856. We need to also reduce this wastage and incompetence. Another thing Singapore did in a long-term planning. But you can't though. So we everything that we are doing to Korea, how does that advance our objective? That's not what we are doing. Last year, based on my data, 751 billion installed projects. Project. Exactly. So 756 billion is money lying around the country. It is not serving anybody to do. Some of these projects are there for 10 years. Interest, illegal contract violations, 57 million. Tokaj Hemodo contract, 5 billion. Public procurement, 4 bidders. Between 5 billion and 5.5 billion. That tells you that the fair price around that 5.5, 5 to 5.5. As soon as I get a model contract, 2 months later, we amend the contract. All of a sudden, they got the 7 billion.
All right.
So we lose 57 billion. Anyway, the point is this: with the Singapore, it requires us to think strategically and to do certain things. You go 75% of your money on debt. Na how do we invest in people here so that we can start selling services and brains?
All right. Yeah. Asante sana Bwana Mwangi ni undu wa gukorwo wi hamwe na ithu na kugeria gutuhuthiria maundu maya makigimainie na kigina giki na ningi thabari no ya guthie Singapore. Ndenda nguhe sekondi 23 uguo uge uhoro na hihi no ukewishira mundu umwe kana Christmas njega.
Asante. I want to wish all Kenyans Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bũrũri witũ wĩna mathĩna maingĩ mũno na mathĩna maya mothe, it comes down to leadership na kwaga andũ maramenya what is the point of government. The point of government is to serve andũ. If we all go back and say how can we evaluate our government? How do we look at whether we are serving people? And you do that for every single shilling tunayo. What did that money do? So I encourage Kenyans makoro hold their leaders accountable. Na makoro makimolia, tell us what you did with every single shilling.
All right.
Yeah.
Asante sana ni twacokia ngatho ni undu wa gukorwo wi hamwe na ithuĩ na utaramu uria wa gĩtũrehera nĩ njũĩ nĩ tũrĩkoragwo twĩna mahinda maingaingĩ maingĩ tũgĩthiĩ na mbere ma kwarangia maũndũ matiganĩte megiĩ ũtongoria wa bũrũri. Tũkwamba gũikĩria oro hanini mũrori wa Kameme TV tũgĩcokereria thutha wa rũgambi rwa rĩkĩratha tũgũkorwo tũkĩnyitania na abitha kuma kũrĩa thĩinĩ wa thirikari ya kaunti ya Nairobi tũkereria ũhoro wĩgiĩ magoti ma tĩri gũkũ thĩinĩ wa Nairobi na maũndũ marĩa mothe mathiũrũrũkĩirie ndeto ĩyo ndũgathengie mũtambo.